In this video, we'll start with an introduction to data flows and learn how to create and author a new data flow. First, we will log into the Composable DataOps Platform, and as mentioned previously, a good place to start is on the search page. You can get to the search page by clicking on Explore All Resources, and here you will see all the various resources that have been created either by you or by others and shared with you. You can quickly filter down to your specific data flow and be able to either open up an existing data flow in a designer or clone an existing data flow. In this video, we will go ahead and create a new data flow application. To do that, you simply go to the side navigation bar and click on the data flow icon or on the Create New Data Flow link. If you're unfamiliar with the side navigation panel, you can always expand out the menu so you could see the fully expanded menu items. When you click on Create New Data Flow, you are brought to the Data Flow Designer. The Data Flow Designer is split up into different sections. The main section in the middle of the screen is the Designer Canvas. This is where we will drag and drop different modules onto the canvas to create our data flow. On the left-hand side of the Designer, we have the Module Palette. Here you can find various modules categorized by functional categories. For example, modules for data sources, operators, activators, and so on. There's a very useful search bar on top of the module palette which allows you to quickly search for modules based on name. As you'll get more familiar with Composable and the data flow modules, you'll find this search bar very efficient. On the right-hand side of the screen is the Properties panel, which includes a set of dynamic cards. The first is the Details card, where we can name a data flow and provide an optional description. Both the name and description are useful when searching for data flows in the search page, and so I recommend you always give your module a good name and a good description. There's a navigation card which provides a quick way to zoom and pan across the canvas. There are additional cards that provide specific module information, various global data flow options, and error handling options. And finally, there's an undo-redo stack that allows you to view various actions that were taken on the designer. The Designer toolbar can be found across the top of the canvas. The toolbar provides various designer functionality such as copy, paste, undo, redo, importing and exporting a data flow, and several auto-arrange and zoom functionality. There are several useful keyboard shortcuts available when authoring a data flow, and these can be seen here. Finally, you can save a data flow and run and execute a data flow. On the bottom of the Designer, we have an Output and Progress panel located at the bottom right of the canvas that is usually initially in a collapsed position and labeled Trace Log. The Output and Progress panel provides monitoring information when executing a data flow, as we will see later. Now that we are familiar with the Data Flow Designer, let's start creating our first data flow. To do so, I'll select one of the simpler modules, specifically a calculator module. I can do so by browsing through the different categories or by simply typing in the module name in the search bar. I can then drag and drop the module onto the canvas. The calculator module is a simple module that will help us demonstrate some basic properties of modules and data flows. All modules have a module name, inputs on the left-hand side, and one or more outputs on the right-hand side. Note that there are hover and right-click features on the name and inputs and outputs. When hovering over the name of the module, you can view its description and version number. Similarly, hovering over the inputs and outputs provides typing and description information. One or more modules make up a composable data flow. So even with this one module, I can click Run to execute the data flow. In this case, we essentially have all our parameters hard-coded in. The first parameter, which is 1, and the second parameter is 2, my operator parameter is set to addition, and so the output is 1 plus 2, which equals 3. I can see the output by simply clicking on it or right-clicking and choosing View Result. Now I can take additional calculator modules and start chaining them together. So here I'll drag and drop another calculator module, and I'll take the output of this first module and connect it to the first input parameter of the second module. Now notice that when module inputs are chained together in this way, any input that is piped in takes precedence over the hard-coded input. So when I run this data flow, the output 3 is used as the input parameter, and we have 3 plus 2, which gives us 5 as our result. Composable ignores any hard-coded input values when the parameters are piped in from other modules. let's add another calculator module to the canvas. Again, we could do that by dragging and dropping the calculator module from the module palette onto the canvas, but in this case, let's use the module's context menu. If I right-click on the module itself, I am presented with a context menu with several choices. One of these is to duplicate the module. So let's click on Duplicate and we'll get a new calculator module on the canvas, and I can rearrange it and take the output of this module and pipe it in as parameter 2. Now when I click Run, I should get 1 plus 2, which is 3 out of this module. Similarly, 1 plus 2 is 3 out of this second module. And finally, 3 plus 3, which equals to 6. Let me click on the trace log to show you some of the monitoring outputs available here. The trace log is split up into 3 tabs, one for output of the modules, one for trace information, and one for module progress. The Output tab shows you a pretty detailed view of each and every module, including their inputs and outputs. The Trace tab will typically show you a bunch of information on the progress of a data flow. In this case, the calculator modules do not print any information to the trace log, and so it's empty. And finally, the Progress tab will show you each and every module execution, its start and end timestamps, and some stats on the module. Let me now introduce and review the Resume feature. You will notice next to the Run button in the toolbar, there is a Resume button. When I click Run on the data flow, each and every module in my data flow will be executed. Oftentimes, I may have one or more modules which I actually don't want to rerun, perhaps because the module is a long-running query or a complex calculation that may take some time. In these cases, the Resume functionality is extremely valuable. When I click Resume, notice that all my outputs are still available. But in the Progress tab here, nothing shows up, whereas before, there were 3 modules that were listed as being executed when I clicked on Run. That's because these modules already executed and nothing changed about them, and so all the outputs remain even though the modules themselves did not actually execute in this specific run. Now let me take the last calculator module and change the operator from plus to minus. Now when I click Resume, notice that only one module actually executed, and that is this last calculator module, because this one module actually had a change to it, and so these first 2 calculator modules did not actually execute. Again, this is a very useful feature if you have a complex data flow that you are iterating through and do not want to rerun each and every module. As you iterate through a data flow, the context menu I showed you earlier by right-clicking on a module could be useful. Sometimes you may want to disable a module, so if I click Disable, the module will be highlighted in red and the module will not run. I can go ahead and re-enable this module. We've seen what Duplicate does. Pin Results forces your results to be pinned, meaning it ensures that your module will not run when you click Resume or Run. You can similarly unpin results, or unpin the results of any downstream modules, or enable a module to enforce its execution. This last option to create a data flow from a selection allows you to select a number of modules and generate a new module that encapsulates the functionality of the selected modules inside a nested data flow. We will use this advanced functionality in a subsequent video. There are also several options that allow you to document the data flow. First, you can actually rename the modules to help you identify the specific function the module has in your DataFlow application. For example, I can rename this to Step 1 by double-clicking on the module name and editing it. Similarly, I can rename this module to Step 2. Note that if I hover over the module name, I see the original name of the module, which allows me to identify it with the modules in the module palette on the left. I can also add comments or sticky notes onto the canvas to help with documentation. Simply right-click on the canvas and click Add Comment. Here, let's add a comment for Step 1. Comments within these sticky notes accept Markdown syntax, so you can use Markdown to nicely format the comment. Let me go ahead and add another comment onto the canvas here to document Step 2. The Composable Designer is meant to serve as a full integrated development environment for visual flow-based programming, and has a built-in debugging environment to aid in troubleshooting the creation and running of data flow applications. By selecting Debug rather than Run, I can step through a data flow run, halting execution after each module execution. I can in this way inspect the intermediary results and understand the order in which modules are running. Once a data flow is saved, I have additional options available to me. These are available either from this new More Details button that appears only for saved data flows or in the side navigation bar. I can view the data flow details, share my data flow, or view past runs. Let's first share our data flow. This allows us to set the owner of the data flow and give granular permissions to other composable users and groups. Remember that Composable is a collaborative development environment, and while any resource you create is initially private and only accessible to you, you can share the resource with other composable users and groups. So, for example, I can select one or more users and groups by typing in their name and choosing them from the autocomplete suggestions, and select specific permissions, for example, clone, delete, execute, read, and finally saving these. Finally, let's save our data flow. When clicking Save, you are provided with an option to provide a message. Data flows are version controlled, and when you save a data flow, it is recommended to provide an optional message. Think of this as a commit message, which is useful when you return to your saved data flow and want to remember what changes were made. So let's add a commit message and click Save. Notice that a saved data flow now gets a unique data flow ID, shown here on the right. Also, you'll see a new version control button, which provides you with a history of all changes made to this data flow. To see this in action, let's add another module to the canvas and click Save again, adding another commit message. I can then go to my version control history and see what user made changes, the time the changes were made, the commit messages, and the granular change details. I can use this version control history to revert back any changes. Now that we provided permissions on the data flow to other users and groups, let's execute the data flow a few times so we can see past runs and details of the data flow. I'll click Run here a couple of times and then look at the past runs. I can access the Past Runs page from the side navigation bar. The Past Runs page is extremely valuable when monitoring data flow executions. Here you can review who ran the data flow, when it was run, its run duration, and its run status. Finally, let's look at the data flow details. The Details page is an overview page that shows you the modules used in the data flow and some specific information about the data flow on the left-hand side. There's also the ability to place the data flow in a specific folder or label it with one or more tags. Both highly useful features for categorizing and searching across data flows, specifically when many data flows are part of a larger project. The right-hand side of the page has a full activity feed and references to the data flow, and several quick links are available in the top right, including the ability to share or clone the data flow, run the data flow outside the designer, and viewing past runs. You can also run the data flow outside the designer by clicking on Run Data Flow. This is useful if you do not want to open up the data flow directly in the designer. Clicking on the Run Data Flow button will generate a modal with the option to run the data flow. If I click Run, I will execute the data flow and be presented with the run's specific details, including its status, start and end times, and individual module inputs and outputs. With that, we will end this video having reviewed the basics of working with modules and creating data flows in Composable. In subsequent videos and online tutorials, we will cover more advanced data flows and data flow features.